I would like to start by thanking everyone for being here today. I am very honored to see all the people that are in attendance. You never know what to expect when you arrange one of these things and how many people will attend. And, it really says a lot about the relationships that my dad had in his life, his colleagues, his friends, how many people cared about him and wanted to be here today. So thank you all for being here. We have a great list of speakers today. And the first being my dad's oldest friend, John Schramm. So John goes back to my dad's first birthday party. They both attended each other's first birthday parties in London, Ontario. And then as adolescents, they were both shipped off to the same boarding school as well, Ridley College in St. Catharines. After graduation, they were in lockstep once more, and they headed back home to London, Ontario, beginning their undergraduate studies at Western. So with that rich history, it makes sense that he would start us off today. So without further ado, John Schramm.
That short biography was my speech. So you're going to hear it for a second time. Anyway, indeed, it was a long time ago, on a wintry afternoon in Ottawa, Jeff's typically sparse email appeared on my screen. And it was soon after we'd come back to Ottawa from our last posting with Global Affairs. What his email said was this: "Can you and Elena come to dinner at our place on January the 30th? It's an occasion, no tie." Well, I thought we'd better come, even though I was quite worried about getting us through the snow of a January day in Canada. Nothing that we had seen in a lifetime in Africa was likely to train me for that. Jeff was then living in the beaches, and when we got to his house, it did, I must say, look quite festive. He opened the door, smiled impishly, I can say, and announced, "I'm 65 today, and in 64 years ago, you and I attended each other's first birthday parties." Indeed, I can only assume neither Jeff nor I disgraced ourselves at the first year party, because we went on to be the very best of friends right through to the end. It was so predestined. We were both from established London, Ontario families, and our mothers played bridge together. In due course, both Jeff and I graduated from Miss Buller's Lilybet Nursery School. In fact, if any of you from London grew up at the same time, I'm sure you would know that hidden away in your archaeology of photographs would be pictures of Miss Buller handing out or entertaining her students in smocks, full academic gowns, and mortarboard heads. Anyway, if you were lucky enough to grow up in London in general in those days, you too will have that picture. You'll know that Lilybet Nursery School was a rite of passage. From those illustrious days, Jeff and I seemed inexorably yoked together. We joined Cubs back in the days when stirring things from Lord Baden-Powell and Rudyard Kipling were still fresh, and old guys like me in our minds, a little bit patriotic, quaint, I suppose. Jeff's father, Stuart, was for some time London's chief scout. We went away to Camp Panaka on Lake Baptiste together. Panaka was new at the time, established 1947, very basic, though it now attracts students from as far away as Mexico. Jeff and I were among the fewer than 30, all boys, who mastered the skills that many of us here in this room will have worked on so hard: building a campfire, singing "You Are My Sunshine," tying a perfect bowline knot, paddling a canoe, and most impressively, mastering the art of peeing through a funnel in the privy wall. When we weren't at camp, we were at our family's cottages on Lake Huron. Jeff and his family in Clovelly on Egerton Beach, and the Shrams on Lakewood Beach, a little bit short of Bayfield. These were rather carefree, happy days, youthful days, just like those on the TV program Happy Days, but of course without Fonz and his motorbike. London in the 1950s offered not a bad start to life for Jeff and me, and Jeff was quick to take advantage of it. To me, Jeff was a special sort of person even then. Abundant observational and analytic qualities, the credibility to influence a guy like me, and following his example, I persuaded my parents to send me off for a couple of years to Ridley College in St. Catharines. Is there anybody here from Ridley? I haven't seen anybody. No, I guess not. And I believe Jeff credited that school with nurturing the writing skills and honing in on his sense of the ironic. Certainly when he arrived at the University of Western Ontario after 5 full years at Ridley, he was intellectually and creatively fully formed. In the course of one night's drive back to London from St. Catharines, the old boys' weekend, Jeff persuaded me to join Beta Theta Pi fraternity at Western. And that, as Robert Frost would have said, has made all the difference. Jeff thrived at Beta and at Western. He became the highly effective, gifted, commanding editor of the university's Gazette newspaper. His first substantial step in preparation for his years as one of the most influential journalists and editors in Canada. He met his wife Danny there. He formed lifelong friendships with many of us, and I suppose that there must be some here in the room who began to know him even then. Of course, our attention on occasions like this is to look at his later life accomplishments and reputation for consistently intelligent, perceptive analysis. But those qualities that prepared him for top editorial positions in Toronto began years ago in his formative years in London. From Lilibet Nursery School to editor, professor, and top journalist, Jeff commanded respect, affection, and even, this is the word I'm having trouble with here, awe. When Jeff graduated from Western and announced that he intended to make a career of journalism, none of us, not me, not his father, who, so the story goes, said, "Can't you get a decent job?" Not his Lilibet classmates could have anticipated his contribution to the profession, nor could we have known what a great Canadian he would become. While the motto or mission statement of Lilibet Nursery School has been forgotten in these many years, whatever it may have been, Jeff would have embodied it just as he did Ridley's motto of terror dum prossum, that is, may I be consumed in service, Western's veritas and utilitas, truth and usefulness, and the root of it all, a secretive motto from Beta Theta Pi, which I can't tell us exactly what it means, but I can tell you these are two personal attributes which all of us know about Jeff, want to stress. Jeff had both of these attributes in spades, all too rare qualities that made Jeff such a remarkable editor, a Canadian journalist, professor, and above all, a friend. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Bob Lewis. So Bob and my dad met as young journalists working alongside each other in the press gallery, with Bob representing Maclean's magazine and my dad the Globe and Mail. Bob would later ascend to the editor-in-chief position at Maclean's, and while in this role, he recruited my dad to join the magazine, pulling him away from Florida, where he had been living for a few years and working his newspaper, The Sun-Times of Canada, and brought him back up to Toronto. Without further ado, Bob Lewis.
Yeah, I know 10 is too many. I've been editing. Dear family and friends, as mentioned, Jeff and I met in 1965 in the Press Gallery. And to be in your 20s in the 1960s and have a journalistic dream job. Those were the days. As John mentioned, after Jeff's dad questioned his sanity, Jeff promptly ignored it and got in his old beater and drove to the Globe and Mail, where he had an interview with Clark Davey looking for a job. Clark turned him down. Undeterred, Jeff walked down the hallway into Editor-in-Chief Dick Doyle's office with his Editor-in-Chief clips, no doubt, from the Gazette. And he impressed Doyle with his clips and also his chutzpah. And Doyle gave him a job for $77 a week, which was $2 more than the offer that Jeff had at that time from CP. So that's why Jeff went to the Globe and Mail for $2. Within 3 years, he was posted to the Ottawa Bureau. And what an exciting time that was. Canadian history unfolding before our very eyes. Pearson versus Diefenbaker, the new Canadian flag, Medicare, later Stanfield versus Trudeau, the War Measures Act, wage and price controls, and all those juicy scandals. In those days, the House of Commons sat at night, and Jeff was a regular observer. He sat and he watched and he learned, and when he didn't understand something, he asked, informing himself on the great issues of the day. And he also made a lot of good contacts in those after hours, and people were flattered that he was paying attention to them. Jeff's first big scoop was about an imminent Liberal plan for a Medicare bill. Health Minister Judy LaMarche poo-pooed the report. Mr. Stevens and the Globe better guess again, she said as she came out of a cabinet meeting. Later that day, LaMarche introduced the bill. By the time Jeff took over the lower left space on page 6 from George Bain, he was a master of his craft. He wrote, as one admirer recently put it, with, quote, world-weary charm. Take an April 1979 piece on the election, where he questioned the absurdity of leaders parading around the country doing things that had nothing to do with being prime minister. Touring a box company, inspecting a produce counter, lighting a string of firecrackers. With uncanny prescience, he wrote, quote, for all the enlightenment it is providing, the campaign might as well be waged in an airport studio in Ottawa. Now, who would ever try something inane like that? He was passionate about Canadian unity and multiculturalism. He decried the circus of question period. Indeed, in his very last column, he advocated a course for all incoming MPs, quote, on Parliament and democracy, on how to use and how not to abuse the institution. And all of that, of course, there was the self-deprecatory wit, his regular advice to leaders. It pains me, sir, to have to tell you, he would begin. There was his ongoing quest for a Senate seat. And finally, the public admission that he could not meet, quote, stringent conditions of our perpetual prime minister who reserves seats only for those who had a conspicuous failure in a Liberal cabinet, which is not as easy as one might expect. Today, you'll hear a lot about Jeff and his kindness to people in his various roles. I reflect on our many years together, almost 60, starting with the early ones when Jeff and Danny extended their legendary hospitality, the sadness when they lost Christopher, the comradeship on the road, my visits with Jeff and Lynn in Tampa, our days at Maclean's, when he brought a vigor to our investigative reports and discipline in the pursuit of news. You'll hear about his editorial leadership at the Globe, how he supported and promoted women in the boys' club that was Canadian journalism for too many years. Jeff made speeches, he did panels, lectured, taught at 2 universities, was involved with 6 outstanding books. But his lasting public legacy, in my view, is his dedication to the truth and his belief in the nobility of engagement in public life. He was outraged by people who were mendacious or corrupt. He lamented when people and individuals fell short, including his beloved Blue Jays. And he celebrated those who excelled. He did so with a determination and style, just like the young man, in my recollection, who dug into the corners on the tennis court and made so many impressive return volleys. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jennifer Lewington. Jennifer is an award-winning journalist. She began working at the Globe and Mail in 1981. She began working in 1981 at the Globe as an Ottawa correspondent for the Report on Business. And later, she became the first female foreign correspondent in the history of the Globe and Mail, making her mark in Washington, D.C. Jennifer Lewington.
I've already lost this. Thank you, first of all, to the family for organizing this very special celebration of life that brings so many of us together from many parts of Jeff's life. My little story is about Jeff's willingness to listen. It was the fall of 1983, or maybe the early spring of 1984, and I had put my name forward as one of the many foreign postings on offer at the time at the Globe. Jeff came to see me in the Ottawa bureau and over coffee proudly announced to me that I would be the Globe's first female correspondent 2 years from now. I was not amused. I felt I had the experience and the credentials to take on a foreign assignment now. So I started to campaign for a position. To his credit, Jeff listened and kept listening even as all the assignments, save for Washington, were handed out. A couple of months later, Jeff called me, and I recall how rueful he was in telling me this, that the Washington position was going to go to a male columnist to, quote, give his career a lift. I remember that line very distinctly. For some reason, I kept campaigning, and again, Jeff kept listening. I suggested a new position in the US. I offered to be a cheap foreign correspondent for the Globe in New York. Just how that was going to happen was unclear even to me. Still, Jeff invited me to come to Toronto to make my pitch to Norman Webster. With Jeff sitting in, Norman quickly brushed away my idea as impossible. I do remember that 2 years later it happened, but there we are. Not with me, I have to say. But he also kept raising all the challenges for women foreign correspondents, and all I could counter with, and to be clear, I did not put myself on a par with her, was I said, Oriana Fallaci didn't seem to have a problem. Meanwhile, and I did not tell Jeff, I had a job offer to go to London with an international news organization. But then through John Fraser, Jeff sent word of a new proposal. I would go to Washington for the Globe as the second person, split my time between the Report on Business and the front section, with a main focus on the looming Canada-US free trade talks under the new, or about to be new, Mulroney Conservative government. The job was a perfect fit, and I collaborated closely with Chris Waddell, who's here today in the Ottawa Bureau, who became a real partner in crime as we chased the negotiations. And we were lucky that the Globe was the only organization that had this sort of 1-2 punch of someone in Washington and someone in Ottawa collaborating the way we did. So we tracked the negotiations as they crawled ahead, and we successfully were able to unravel key parts of the final agreement. And our reporting partnership led to a National Newspaper Award for business reporting for the Globe in 1988. I was really proud of that award, but I was even prouder of what happened next with Jeff and Norman. they began to name a stellar cast of female foreign correspondents, Jan Wong, who's here today, Stephanie Nolan, Linda Hosey, among them, and now even more today, to international postings and hotspots far more challenging than I ever faced in Washington. From my perspective, none of these breakthroughs would have happened without Jeff's capacity to listen, to recalibrate, and then take action. And in the years since, Jeff became a great mentor to me, as I know he was to many, always willing to listen and always prepared to give sound advice. I miss his wit, I miss his deep appreciation for national politics, and his consistent professional approach to journalism. We are all richer for his body of work, even to his last column, giving us his intelligent perspective on the top issues of the day. I hope we can find a way to honor this legacy. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Michael Adams. Michael Adams is a close family friend and also the founding president of Environics. And that's how his relationship with my dad started. Michael came to my dad when he was the managing editor of the Globe and Mail and proposed to integrate more polling into their articles. And that's how their relationship started. They did so, and it was very successful. And they developed a friendship and spent many years playing tennis together, which Patrick Martin, who wrote my dad's obituary, he wanted me to add that Michael was by far the best tennis player of the group, and he would beat them quite handedly until the former publisher and late John Hondrick came around and then gave Michael a bit of a challenge. But Michael is a great friend. Spent many years with Michael and his family, and I'm looking forward to hearing him speak. So, Michael Adams.
Young man, that was my speech. Well, thank you, Jamie. And it's moving to be at one of these events. You know half the people in the room. Every time you see someone, you think of an anecdote, probably that would have involved Jeff. I'm honored to speak. And as Jamie said, I met Jeff in, 82, 83, a young guy like he had been 10 or 15 years before when Dick Doyle gave him a break. And I said, I think, the Star's been doing some really poor polling for the last 20 years. It's time that the Globe and Mail did some real... I was a cheeky guy, I guess, in those days. And I said, we should have a polling program at the Globe, and I'll take the lead. And he agreed, and we did that for about 10 years. We had two fabulous federal elections, the 84 election, and then the greatest election, I think, in Canadian history, the 88 election. It was this is when we're debating that free trade with the United States. Of course, our relationship with the United States had been why we have a country. And then free trade was always a very controversial topic for any politician to propose. So our polling in that 88 election, unfortunately, was showing that the support of the public for the free trade agreement that Mulroney had negotiated with Reagan, or at least their officials, was declining in the election. And but in spite of that, Jeff insisted that the polling we did would appear on the front page of the newspaper, even though the editorial page was very much for the free trade agreement and very much for the re-election of the Mulroney government. So we loved doing those polls. We wrote them up every quarter. Sometimes I'd get an inspiration to say we should be adding some questions on the poll. I remember one December, I said, we ought to put these questions on a poll. And he said, I have no budget for that. So I said, can we have a meeting? So I went into his office and I said, Jeff, we must add these questions to the survey. He said, Michael, I have no budget for this, but actually the only thing I can really pay you with is my tie. So he proceeded to take off his tie and gave it to me. And in return for that, we put 2 or 3 questions on the next survey and reported them proudly. I'm not wearing the tie today, but my son Will is wearing it. It's quite a fashionable tie, probably bought for $5 or $10 Bay Days, whatever. So we did become very good friends. And as Jamie has said, one of the ways that we had fun was not during the day, but in the evening when we played tennis. And we were joined in this by a number of several friends. Diana Crosby, I haven't seen Diana. Patrick. I think Hugh Windsor was an honorary member, because I think Jeff and Hugh had actually started this Monday night tennis in Ottawa, and then it came to Toronto. And then later, of course, John Hondrick joined us. And we, after a while, decided that it's a long, cold winter in Canada. We should have a tournament. We'll call it Winter Wimbledon. And sometimes we had it on Valentine's Day. And a lot, you would bring your partner on Valentine's Day and play tennis. Now, let me tell you, that is not always the best way. If you've ever played tennis with your partner, your spouse, in doubles, and it's a tournament, and it's, you must win. There are other ways to celebrate Valentine's Day, I'm sure. But anyway, we thought it was great. Lash made some T-shirts with hearts on them and all of that sort of thing. So people would play like mad. Again, this is in the dead of winter and so on, couples playing and so on. And then we kept track of their games and how they did. And then we would have a little cabal of the organizers, and we'd meet. And this is where Jeff shone, because he was able to channel the Almighty to know who should be in the finals of our tournament. And they were always meritorious. That was always a brilliant final. We awarded people trophies for champion and finalist and so on. I think one year, Bob Ray and Arlene won. And actually, it wasn't much of a surprise. They both were great players. We had been actually really surprised when he got elected premier. And you can mention that to your guy. He'll get even with me, I'm sure. We took trips. We went abroad one year, 1986. I checked this with Larry Martin, because Larry was the Globes guy in Moscow. And that was quite a trip. Moscow, St. Petersburg, then was Leningrad, and so on. So 86, this is the era of perestroika and glasnost. This is when Mikhail Gorbachev is turning things upside down. So he said, Larry, will you give us a tour? And he took us around the city. We went to Boris Pasternak's grave and all of that wonderful stuff. But he took us to a very artsy street called the Arbat. And we went into a bar for a beer, which was one of the things they were able to make in those days that you could consume and not be sick. So we went into this bar, 1986, it was July. It had to be July because we went into the bar, and on the screen were American cartoons, Disney cartoons, with Roadrunner and all of that. And Jeff and I said, this is ridiculous. Wimbledon's on now. It's probably on one of their channels. So why don't we get them to change the channels? And of course they did. And again, it was good that Jeff was so persuasive. We were able to watch Boris Becker win Wimbledon that year. So it was a really wonderful, I guess tennis is kind of one of those things that's a common thread throughout our friendship. Unfortunately, about 10 years ago, we had to wind down Wimbledon because at Wimbledon, Bronwyn Drainie had organized that there would be Scrabble for those who didn't play tennis. And we'd done this, and there were 3 or 4 people in the early days that were playing Scrabble. But as time went on, there were more people playing Scrabble than able to play tennis. So we knew it was time. I want to personally thank Patrick for that obit. It moved me. You did a wonderful job in paying tribute to our friend. Jeff, I want to thank you for those books. Bob Stanfield, John Crosby, Dalton Camp, Flora, I don't have to say her last name. It was a beautiful book. And then the books he did with John Lassinger, the great organizer. I think we're going to hear from Lash on Lash's career in politics. Jeff and Lynn, Casey, and Jamie moved to Cambridge. He got academic jobs, I think, at Guelph and Wilfrid Laurier. But the gift that he gave all of us was the continuing gift of those weekly columns, which he did right up to the very end, as Bob said. And they were wonderful. And one of the themes that I thought was in all those columns was not just his wit and great writing. He really could write beautifully. Was his sympathy for the underdog. And maybe that's why he wrote about so many conservatives. I don't know. Lash, maybe you could reflect upon that. Anyway, we really thank him. I think about him a lot. I miss him. I think the country does. And we all miss Winter Wimbledon.
Next, I actually have a remembrance to read from my dad's friend Bill Schwartz, that went to Western with him and was a fraternity member, also from Cambridge, so one of his friends once we moved from Toronto, and he's a lawyer as well. So many things wrapped into one. Starts by saying, I remember Geoff Stevens. In 1962, Geoff and I, a seasoned 18-year-old from Regina, were at the University of Western Ontario, as it was known then. And the Beta Theta Pi fraternity, we're Beta Theta Pi fraternity brothers, my apologies. Geoff was 1 or 2 years ahead of me. Geoff was an editor-in-chief at the Gazette, and I was commissioner without portfolio in the University Students' Council. That fall, the consumption of alcohol by spectators at football games became troubling. As a consequence, the University Student Council decreed that the consumption of alcohol in the stadium would result in eviction from the game. Notwithstanding this decree, my roommate Don and I decided to test the system by taking with us to the game a duffel bag with beer at the bottom and slightly soiled athletic paraphernalia on top. As I uncapped my first bottle and touched my lips, I looked down the rows and saw a university policeman staring directly at me. The result was not unforeseen. The next day, the headline in the Gazette read, USC Commissioner Schwartz evicted from game, and called for my resignation. I complied. That night at the fraternity, I confronted Geoff and asked him how he could possibly do this to me. His reply to this seasoned 18-year-old was, Bill, you'd better start to learn to practice what you preach. This episode probably did not make Geoff a better journalist, but it did teach me that Geoff, as a good journalist, was also a damn good educator. And that is that. And they remained friends, fortunately, so there was a happy ending. Anyway, we have one more speaker, and then we're going to take an intermission. Thank you all for sitting patiently and listening to everyone. The intermission will be about 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll call you back. But before that, the next up is John Fraser. Let me pull my notes here again. So John also worked with my dad at the Globe and Mail. A bit of a theme here that we're establishing. At the Globe, John held foreign correspondent positions in both Beijing and London. John's work has been published in many leading international journals and newspapers, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Daily Telegraph, and Time Magazine. I'll get one more big name in there. And when speaking of John, my dad was quoted as saying, and thank you, Patrick, for the quote, John was the kind of reporter who could land anywhere in the world and file a story by the end of the day, which was quite a rarity within journalism. So, John Fraser.
Oh, this is emotional. I have three things which I'll try and be succinct. I want to talk about him as a friend, as a boss and mentor, but I think just to keep the theme going, I'll talk about him as a tennis player. I don't have such fond memories of him as a tennis player. I never beat him once. So, I mean, and if he never beat you, I know. He wasn't even a lot better as a doubles partner. I remember him once saying, "John, if you stop being so frightened of the net, we might do better." But that was the part of Jeff I liked the most because he was plain speaking. I think John Schramm mentioned all the mottos. The one that Jeff also lived up to incredibly was the Globe and Mail motto about the subject, the famous subject of the chief magistrate who will neither advise nor submit to arbitrary measures. And that also included publishers of the Globe and Mail. And I know Philip Crawley's here. I don't think he ever worked directly with Philip, but he worked for Roy McGarry. And he had what I would say was a healthy attitude to publishers, which was mostly negative, although he understood that they were necessary. I'm looking, a couple of them around here. So this is maybe the time to tell you about the illegal sub-bureau in Paris, which when I was the London correspondent, there were expenses rolling up because there was then a magazine called there were several magazines the Globe and Mail did, and one had a fashion magazine, and he was complaining about the cost of putting the upkeep for all the photographers and reporters. And I said, I've got a friend from the Beijing days, Francis Deron, who was with the Agence France Presse, who's got a little apartment in the 5e arrondissement, a very nice part of Paris. And I said, he asked me if we'd be interested in sort of subletting it for a couple of years while he was in Bangkok. I said, what about a sub-bureau? I said, you could put all those people up in there and not pay the hotel bills, and I could use it occasionally. Someone mentioned the golden days of journalism. I was someone who had a house in Hammersmith and a sub-bureau in Paris. The only condition was that I was never to tell Mr. McGarry about it. And I never did, but it taught me a lesson. There was a Machiavellian side to Geoffrey, which I fully appreciated. I think I just want to get across what a great friend he was, as both a friend and as a boss. Journalism is, as anyone who's been in it, is an up and down career. You do well sometimes, and sometimes there's big downs. And I was no different than anyone else. I came back from China in a kind of triumph, and then I was given as my reward a column which I didn't know how to do, and I failed in it week after week until Geoffrey sort of mentored me into a position where I could do a column that kept focus on something rather than on nothing, and got me doing it long enough to free me from it and put me on the national desk to give me some administrative experience, which was a wonderful setup before he and Norman sent me to London. And he cared about his journalists. He really did. I don't think there's one person who ever worked for him here who didn't understand that care was there one way or another. Sometimes hard words like, you could do better if you were up at the net. But I will go to my grave incredibly grateful. The other thing I want to say, just to give you all get the break, is that we should all be lucky, so lucky to have kids like Geoffrey Stevens had. I had lunch with Geoffrey a few weeks before he died. He came into town with Jamie, and I think I will never forget the care and love that went into getting him into that restaurant. Geoffrey was really courageous, but he was allowed to be courageous because he had kids who supported him all the way. So I'd like to make that tribute and then let you have a break. Thank you very much.
The next up to the podium is Jan Wong. So Jan is another journalist, author, and she is a force. As my dad once said, she has ice water in her veins, and that is meant as a compliment. She was also a foreign correspondent for the Globe in Beijing, and she is a dear friend of my dad. He would speak quite glowingly of her. Unfortunately, I didn't have the privilege of spending a lot of time with Jan, but I know much about her from how highly my dad would speak of her, and he would always keep one of her many books on a shelf right in his office, right next to his chair. So I know Jan quite well through that. And without further ado, Jan Wong.
Well, like many people in this room, Jeff hired me. At my job interview in 1987, I told various editors my goal was the Beijing Bureau, not the business section. And the Globe's foreign editor snorted, get in line. But within 6 months, I became the Globe's first woman and its first reporter in the Beijing Bureau, and the first to speak, read, and write Chinese. My 12 white male predecessors, none of them spoke Chinese. I just thought I'd mention that. Jeff gave the runner-up, because there was competition, to Edith Terry, who also spoke Chinese. He gave her the new Tokyo Bureau, and he sent Linda Hossey to Mexico City. Inside the newsroom, he promoted Gwen Smith, a young assistant city editor, to the powerful position of national editor. Gwen told me she was the first female head of any Globe department. Soon after I arrived in Beijing in '88, Jeff and Norman stopped by on their world tour of Globe foreign bureaus. I blurted out, because I was actually the only married female correspondent. Someone pointed this out to me just now. I blurted out I might have to have children during my posting, because I had postponed a family for so long, my biological clock was ticking like a time bomb. And Jeff and Norman instantly agreed. We think children are great, they said. I think they were a little nervous. Thus, I became the first Globe foreign correspondent to have children during a posting. For context, yes, thank you. For context, in 1993, Jeff was gone by then, my newsroom spies told me the new editor muttered, "What? She's pregnant again?" On that sad tour, Jeff and Norman were gloomy because of trouble back home. It was over the hiring of yet another strong female reporter. Jeff had hired Barbara Yappi for the Vancouver Bureau. She'd sold her house in St. John's, Newfoundland. Her husband had relocated his business to Vancouver, and they were in the process of moving across the country. The publisher, a bean counter from Belfast, vetoed the hire. Jeff went to the mat for Barbara. The publisher fired Norman, and Norman's replacement forced Jeff out. Jeff sued the Globe, and so did Barbara Yappi, and they both won. Newspapers, right? Some might call Jeff a feminist, but this wasn't affirmative action. Jeff would not do something like that. Jeff was much more than affirmative action. He was someone without prejudice who saw past gender and, in my case, color. He was an editor who noticed talent, who celebrated persistence and gave us the freedom to do our jobs. Until him, males hogged every plum job at the Globe. Without fanfare, Jeff ended that male monopoly. You've already heard that he sent Jennifer Lewington to DC, although it took 2 years. He never stopped supporting us. In 1986, Jeff hired the great Stevie Cameron. She would go on to win prizes for her investigative reporting on Mulroney, Airbus, and Robert Pickton, Canada's worst serial killer. A quarter century later, in 2012, Jeff wrote a letter of support to honor Stevie Cameron with the Order of Canada. He cited both her journalism and humanitarian work. He called her, quote, the best investigative reporter Canada has ever produced. Stevie later wrote to Jeff to express her thanks, quote, it is something to change someone's life for the better, and you have done that for me, Stevie said. But you really did it years and years ago when you hired me at the Globe and supported my crazy adventures. When Jeff developed Parkinson's, I organized lunches and dinners at my Toronto home so he could hang out for hours with friends like Stevie and his co-author, John Lassenger. On June 13th, I was in Europe when Jeff emailed a joke about Trump. He sent it to a bunch of people. And so I sent him a note back. I said, how about another meal at my place? I'm back the day before the mayoral election. We can chew over the mayoral election, I wrote, adding, I heard Lash is working on Matlow's campaign. Jeff replied, "Yes, Lash is working on the Matlow campaign. It's not going well. Name recognition makes Olivia Child a leader in the polls. She looks like the only candidate who is not tied to Doug Ford's apron strings, who will have a chance on June 26. Jeff always called it right." I hadn't seen Jeff in a few months because he had spent last spring sprucing up his Cambridge house to sell. He said he would move to Toronto after his house closed on August 22nd. Quote, "I'm going to send out change of address emails in the next few days," he wrote. "I've been moving small loads of stuff to the condo since April, so it is marginally habitable. Has beds, a couch, coffee machine, couple of plates, and a wine cooler." He said, "I'll be functional by Labor Day. Lunch or dinner thereafter would be great." 4 days later, Jeff spent the day with his family, filed his final column, and settled into his favorite chair to read. It was Father's Day, and Jeff was 83.
Next up, we have Pat Webster. Pat Webster is another very close friend of my father's, and I consider a dear friend as well. She's been very kind to my family over the years, even dating prior to my existence. Pat met my dad through her late husband, Norman Webster. Both were colleagues, journalists at the Globe and Mail, and they became best friends. And over the years, they would spend many a time together, and my dad was very fond of Pat. And only 2 or 3 months before his passing, she came to stay with us in Cambridge, and it really brought out the best in him. And he would always get excited and look forward to speaking with her and visiting her, and I know that they were planning to do so again in the future. Pat herself is an author, passionate about horticulture. Her book, Autobiography of a Garden, I actually have in my condo now. It's very aesthetically pleasing, so I have it on the coffee table. But anyway, I will bring Pat up now. All right, I'll bring that down for you a little bit.
Yeah, thanks. When Jamie asked me to speak today, I was really pleased. It doesn't begin to say it. I was really honored, and not just because I was going to have a chance to say some nice things about Jeff, though that certainly is big on it, but because I knew that this event was going to be so terrific. How nice it's been to see and to reconnect and to have a chance even to speak very briefly with so many old friends, friends not just of Jeff's, friends of Norman's, friends of ours over the years. Like the rest of you, Jeff and I were friends. Many of you were colleagues and friends. Oh, and Jan, Norman spoke a little bit of Chinese, not very much, but he did speak a little bit, which of course he learned while we were there. I could count E or sensor. Woo, that's about it. One of my favorite memories of Jeff comes from a photograph. And it's a photograph, if I remember correctly, that Norman took of Jeff when they were in the early 70s. They were on an extended trip in Africa with Trudeau. And Jeff was standing at Victoria Falls next to the water, shaking his fist across the waters at what was then Rhodesia. Obviously, this was a photo that they had staged together. I think somewhere in the archives, I probably have one of Norman doing exactly the same thing. And but to me, this photograph always has summed up something about Jeff, about Norman, about journalists in general. Jeff, I think it said something about the way the two men related to each other. About the way they saw their job and their responsibilities as journalists. Both of them as nice as they were cynical. They were self-deprecating. I think Michael, you used that word. But cynical, as if a journalist's fist shaking could change anything about the political situation. But at the same time, it was lighthearted. It was humorous. Everybody has talked about Jeff's humor. It was also a way of expressing a point of view about something that they cared about deeply, a political position that they thought should change, that did. Now, I honestly don't remember the first time I met Jeff. I met Danny very shortly thereafter. But the first time I met Jeff, whether it was before or after Norman and I were married, a long time ago. What do I remember from Jeff then? First of all, he was young. We were all younger then. There's a photo that's run here on the screen, and it took away my best line, which is he was a bit stocky for a young guy. He had blonde hair, and his hair was cut short in this flat top, this brush cut, like something from the 1950s. So the first time I met him, I can remember thinking, he looks a bit like a Bulgarian hitman. Okay. It's not who he turned out to be. He was a hard hitter at tennis. I mean, tennis has come up a lot. He was certainly a hard hitter as a journalist. I'm not sure how often he comforted the afflicted, but he certainly afflicted the comfortable regularly in his columns and in his conversations. Talking. Most of my memories about Jeff, most of my relations with Jeff were based around conversations, about talking. Often those were conversations just between Jeff and Norman. They were comrades in the very best sense of the words. They worked together, and they never stopped talking about that, about the people, about the problems, about the politics. Those conversations often took place after dinner or at the end of a party, and I must confess that they did involve quite a bit of liquid refreshment. They often lasted late into the night until the bottle of whatever it was they were drinking that particular evening has finished. I would listen. I was actually, sometimes I was a participant. I've never been known to not have an opinion on something. And if I know less about it, the more opinionated I am. But I often sat in those conversations, but I think I really was an unnecessary audience. I was a bit like a third wheel. Sometimes whatever I said would kind of throw their conversations off balance. But mostly, I listened, and I listened, and I would try not to fall asleep. And then I would find a comfortable bed or a sofa somewhere. So I think I fell asleep in almost every house that Jeff and Danny and then Jeff and Lynn ever lived in. They discussed whatever it was that was on their minds that night, whether it was, I don't know, they may have theorized about who did what and why, whether that was a good decision, a bad decision. My first clear memory of one of those conversations was actually at Stony Lake, where the Underhills had a cottage. And it was a marathon weekend, and it was a marathon talk fest. I got up after a went to the little guest cottage nearby and just lay down and fell asleep. That was the first, as I say, of many times that I did that. But their conversations continued, not only at Stony Lake, but at Canada, in Ottawa, at Sandy Hill, Tampa, the beaches, a couple of houses in the beaches, if I remember, and then back to Cambridge. Jeff and Norman, I think, were alike in many ways. They were decent men who cared about their families and cared about the world they were part of. They worked hard. They had strong opinions. And even when they disagreed, they respected each other's views. Now, in recent years, they talked a lot on the phone because Jeff and Norman both had Parkinson's disease. And they commiserated about their health. But more often than not, they just ignored the thing that they couldn't change and talked about the ideas and the policies, the things where they thought they still might be able to make a difference. They questioned what they heard and read. They looked for the facts, whatever they were, to support their positions. They were news hounds at heart, and their desire to share what they knew, to report, and most of all to opine, never left them. Not long before Norman's death, Jeff and Patrick Martin visited us in North Hatley, a visit that stands out very strongly in my heart, and I thank Patrick every day for it. That visit meant a lot to the three of them, to the four of us, to all of us. It certainly meant a lot to me because after Norman's death, I visited Jeff, as Jamie says, a couple of times in Cambridge. We went to Stratford together on that last visit, and we continued a tradition. Drinking a glass or two ourselves and talking. We talked because Jeff was concerned about me, how I would manage on my own. Because for all of his outward cynicism, Jeff, I think, was incredibly kind and caring. This is the thing that perhaps the single word that has come through in everyone's remarks, how caring he was. Our son David is here with us today. David is an academic now, but one of his earliest jobs was working for the Sun-Times. This was when the Sun-Times was just a brand new thing, and operated out of Jeff and Lynn's living room. And Jeff always made David lunch. David was writing pieces for the Sun-Times, and he would send off to Jeff, or maybe even walk it across the room. I don't know. Jeff would say, no, go back and work on it a little more. 5 drafts, 6 drafts. David says he doesn't remember exactly how many, until finally on we'll say the 6th draft, Jeff said, oh, this is fine. Which David saw and said, this is high praise indeed. Jeff was not only kind, he was funny. A lot of people have said how witty he was. He could take the dullest of topics and he could find humor in it, except, of course, when it came to one of his favorite topics, the law of the sea. No one could save that story. Jeff was a great guy. I think we all agree on that. And I think we all agree, too, that we miss him immensely. Thanks.
This letter, I owe it to John Laschinger for pulling some strings. He has immense contacts politically through his years as a campaign manager. And he was able to get a letter from former Prime Minister Joe Clark, who I didn't know had a relationship with my dad. I learned that after his passing, but he kindly sent a letter for me to read today. Let me begin. Dear members of the family of Geoff Stevens, I am writing to express my sorrow and regret at Geoff's death. As you may know, we have been writing and speaking in the week he passed, and he was full of life and plans. I know his health had been rocky recently, but that didn't deter him from continuing to make a real and constructive difference. Geoff and I both embarked on careers in journalism, and he was much more durable in that field than I was. He respected and established the highest standards of that challenging profession and became a model of both honesty and insight. He reported what political leaders did and tried to do, not merely what we said or what befell us, and sought consistently to be fair. I also admired his writing beyond journalism and his respectful treatment of 2 people whom I worked with so closely, Robert Stanfield and Flora MacDonald. The wonderful Flora sometimes required patience as well as respect, and Geoff's instincts and skill at both qualities yielded a biography which allows future generations to understand the impact and strength of a woman who transformed public life in Canada. I send my sympathy and my thanks for the privilege of knowing him. Joe Clark. Okay. And next up is John Laschinger. And I was going to thank him at the end, but I think I'll do so now briefly. this wouldn't be possible today without John. He called me around 30 or 40 times in the last 2 or 3 months, helping me to organize this. And he equipped his skills as a former campaign manager to organize this event. And his attention to detail has been incredible. And I appreciate him leading me through this process, as it wasn't an easy one. And he taught me a lot. As I said, he worked as a campaign manager with several high-profile politicians, and his work inspired the writing of 2 books, which he co-authored with my dad. The first being Leaders and Lesser Mortals, Backroom Politics in Canada, and most recently, Campaign Confessions, Tales from the War Rooms of Politics. On top of their working relationship, he was a dear, dear friend of my dad's. Every summer, we would go up and stay with John at his cottage. John is more than just a friend of my dad. I see him in a lot of ways as a father figure. He taught me how to fish. He taught me how to water ski and many other things. And he has really shown me how much he cared about my dad. And I would like to bring him up now. John.
Yeah. I've gotten to know Jamie over the last 3 or 4 months really well. And it was a pleasure to help him. He had a lot on his plate. He stepped forward. He just started the new job 2 weeks ago. He just finished moving to Toronto, all of that came on top of everything else that was going on in his life. Anyway, he stepped forward, and I'm super impressed with how he responded to all of this. In 1973, Jeff wrote one of his mischievous columns in the Globe and Mail. It was a humorous help wanted ad for the Conservative Party of Canada. They were looking for a new national director. Jeff painted an unflattering opinion of this new position. Shortly thereafter, I took a leave of absence from my rising career at IBM and was appointed national director by Robert Stanfield. I then showed up in Jeff's column shortly thereafter. He had found out that a colleague of mine had left IBM the same week to run a nudist camp in Quebec. You can imagine how much fun Jeff had asking which one of these people had gotten the job with the best long-term future and the most job satisfaction. Fast forward to 1989. Jeff and I had just signed a contract with Key Porter to write a book about the back rooms of politics. On New Year's Day, I met June Callwood for the first time. She and Jeff knew each other, but I didn't know June. She wanted to explain to me the relationship between an author and the book that they were working on. And she said, this relationship is like a relationship between two lovers. She said, at first, everything is wonderful, exciting, and then the routine sets in. When you're sitting at your computer, in those days it was a typewriter, but when you're sitting with your computer at 5 a.m, it starts to feel a little less wonderful. She said that writing a book with a co-author was even more difficult. And I still remember her words to this day. She said she hoped my relationship with Jeff would survive. Well, 34 years later, and a second book later, our friendship did more than survive. We became very close friends. Jeff and his family spent time at the cottage most summers. Jeff and I played tennis in Ottawa and then Toronto. We both suffered and occasionally celebrated Blue Jays wins and losses. And for several years, I lectured one of his political science or journalism classes at either Laurier or Guelph. And we frequently compared notes on the current political races I was involved in. Many years ago, I learned that the most treasured aspects of one's life achievements are qualitative in nature. They're not the awards granted, the books written, or the columns written. Jeff had many of those, and others today have addressed those achievements. I would add one more. In a recent email, Anna Porter, who published 3 of Jeff's books, described him as a brilliant writer. She and Julian would have been with us today, except for a pre-planned trip to Paris. But while all those achievements are important, the most important to me are the qualitative words that people use to later describe your character. After Jeff's passing, I heard words from those who worked with him or knew him, such as kind, gentle, feminist, empathetic, considerate, fair, supportive, compassionate, innovative, and self-effacing. I saw all of that in my relationship with Jeff. Over the last number of years, as my wife Carola has been fighting the ravages of dementia, there wasn't a conversation we had where he didn't ask how she was. Despite his own battle with Parkinson's, he made the effort several times to get to Toronto to see her. I don't think Jeff realized the impact that his work had on others or on the political landscape of Canada. Ed Lumley, a member of Pierre Trudeau's cabinet, told me recently that reading Jeff's column was a daily must for him as a minister, as he learned things and gained insights on issues that he didn't always get from his ministerial staff. He was never afraid to take the road less traveled. A perfect example, who can forget his fascination with the Law of the Sea Conference? He was a man of great curiosity and imagination, and a wonderful sense of mischievous humor. This was with him to the end as he filed his last column, a 3-point plan for Justin Trudeau to save his job. I know Sean, Alexandra, Casey, Jamie, his sister Carol, and Danny will miss Jeff greatly. But I hope their memories of a wonderful man will give them some comfort in the days ahead. Farewell, dear friend. And Jeff, you were right. The Blue Jays didn't make the playoffs. The team was just too inconsistent.
The second last is Arlene Pearlie Ray. She is the wife of Bob Ray, former premier, former leader of the Liberal Party federally. She herself is a journalist and an author, and she is an advocate for literacy and also children's rights. And she will be coming up to the podium and speaking on behalf of her husband.
I apologize for not being Bob. He would have had such a good time replying to so many of the speeches and riffing off some of the things you said. But I've been enjoying watching the screen because it reminded me so much of Jeff's intense, attentive face and the way he would pay such close attention, but with a kind of sardonic distance, a little impishness, as if he was sort of judging what you said. And of course, no one yet has mentioned that incredible helmet of hair that he had for so many years, that sort of brown gold. It shows up in several of the pictures, in particular one in a blue sweater, a close-up that is how I see Jeff and always will. Bob is home with a terrible cold. I have it just in my throat, and I apologize for that. And I'll just read his remarks, which will be much drier than if he had been here and able to embellish them, but please forgive me. Geoff Stevens was a writer's writer, a journalist's journalist. He mainly wrote about politics and politicians, but his real passion was journalism, the business of writing, editing, getting out a weekly or daily column. I first met Jeff, as I did many others who are here today, after I was first elected to Parliament in 1978. I quickly realized that a scripted answer from central casting was not going to work. He wanted more depth, more nuance. Indeed, in one of my first panel interviews, where both Jeff and Bob Lewis were among the interviewers, that what seemed to work with all candidates' meetings was just not going to cut it. Neither was accepting of that. He was not easy to charm or to impress. His quiet demeanor could be quite intimidating, but I realized soon enough that if he could not be bamboozled, he actually respected the politician's craft as much as he did the journalists. His books about the politicians he respected, not a liberal or New Democrat among them, unfortunately, are filled with the great humor, insight, and empathy that he is known for. His 2-volume tour of the back rooms with John Lassenger are a truly entertaining account of the foibles and theories of those who think they understand politics better than anyone else. Jeff began his career in the heyday of the parliamentary galleries in Ottawa and in Toronto. It was a time when, above all, politicians and journalists engaged with each other. Political opponents were not enemies, and neither were journalists. Much has happened to change things around the world, in both the media and in public life, and not for the better. Through all this, Jeff kept writing, teaching, and sharing. He never let up. He suffered life's losses and pain with dignity, and stood tall with all of us because of his talent and his integrity. I am glad to have been lucky enough to know him, to have shared moments in Canada's history that have made a difference, to have been able to exchange what we both thought were wry quips with each other, fellow players playing different games, but in my case, stopping long enough to admire a master at work. Much love to all Jeff's family. He was a good man.
Before we conclude, we have a letter to read, and we have the final speaker, my sister Casey. That's a job that I wouldn't want to have myself to close, but appreciate her for doing it. Quickly, though, I would like to thank one other person, Patrick Martin, who is sitting here to my right. Yes. Patrick is another Globe and Mail journalist. He wrote a beautiful obituary for my dad that was very touching, and I learned many things about him that I had never known before. So I greatly appreciate that. He also made many contributions to organizing this event today. He was in touch with Arlene and Bob. He also helped me with my talking points, which I've been stumbling through today. So thank you, Patrick. Before I bring my sister up, I have one more letter to read. And this is another thank you to John, who, through his contacts again, arranged a letter from the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And who's to say if Justin penned this himself? It is a very personal letter. I don't know if it was a staff member and Justin signed off on it, but for the sake of the reading of this letter, let's all pretend that this was first person from Justin Trudeau. Okay. Yes. Dear friends and family of Geoff Stevens, I would like to offer my heartfelt condolences to you on your loss. I was terribly sorry to learn of his passing. I want to join all of Geoff's friends and family today as we pay tribute to his rich, remarkable life and to his long and vital career in journalism. It isn't lost on me that Geoff's very last column was some free, albeit totally unsolicited advice for yours truly. I was just the latest in a long line of prime ministers to whom Geoff dispensed wise counsel. I don't know if I can or really should follow every recommendation that he made. However, I know that I can take the cue from the open-hearted, positive, constructive way it was offered. That's the way Jeff always approached his craft. It's one reason he made such a mark, and it's why I join all of you today in saluting Jeff Stevens. Please know that my thoughts and deepest sympathies are with you. Justin Trudeau. All right. And lastly, I don't see her at the moment, but my sister Casey will be coming up. Again, she's braver than I to be closing. She's coming from the West Wing here. There we go. And if I don't have a chance to thank you all as well, I appreciate all of you coming today. It's been very touching. Here she is. I don't have much of an intro for her, as she's my sister, and I don't intend to compliment her as much as others.
Okay, well, I guess I don't really need to introduce myself because Jamie just did. I was going to say that for those of you who don't know me, my name is Casey, and I'm Jeff's daughter, youngest daughter. So to start with, I would like to thank you all for coming today to celebrate my dad's life. His friends and family were so important to him, and he often spoke of them in great detail. He would be deeply touched and honored that all of you came today to celebrate his life, as am I. As I'm sure many of you were, we were shocked by his sudden passing. You know, there wasn't any sign that it was coming, and I don't think that he would have expected it either. I always knew he wouldn't be around forever, but I thought that we had more time. I wasn't prepared to lose him, and I know that he wasn't ready to go either. He still had things he wanted to do, places he wanted to go, and people he wanted to spend time with. Sorry. He still had life that he wanted to live. I know he was thinking of writing another book, and I had encouraged him to finally write a book about himself, to write his memoirs. I thought it was about time. He seemed open to the idea. Maybe he will, I said. He said, I wish he'd been able to. He spent his life writing about other people and their accomplishments, or lack thereof, but never about himself. And I know he had many of his own stories to tell, but sadly he ran out of time to tell them. That's the thing about time. We always think that we have more of it than we do. But life is fragile and everything can change in an instant. I will miss my dad for the rest of my life. And although that may be difficult and painful, that's okay. I would rather love deeply and miss someone acutely than not at all. One of my most treasured memories of my dad is from my childhood. On the days when he would drive me to school, those were the days when he was working as a managing editor at Maclean's, so he was very busy. He would be dressed up for work in his suit, and I would be dressed in my school uniform. He would have his travel mug of coffee, and I would have mine of Earl Grey tea, and off we would go in the car. In the car, we would listen to CBC News, of course. We would listen to the morning news about all of the things going on in the world, and we would talk about it. He would explain to me what was happening, and I would listen. It made me feel so grown up sitting in that car with my dad, drinking our coffee and tea and discussing the news. Sorry. In a year and a half before he died, I had started taking him to physio every Tuesday morning. I had found a good physiotherapist 45 minutes away that specialized in treating people with Parkinson's. It took a lot of persuading to convince him to go, but eventually he did. On Tuesday mornings, we would get in the car with our travel mugs of coffee and embark on the 45-minute drive to Elmira. In the car, we would listen to the news, or my dad would put on his Spotify playlist of songs from his youth, and we would sing along. After his appointment, he would usually want to go for lunch, and so we would head to a local Mennonite-run restaurant. On those days, I vividly recall looking across the table at him and soaking in the moment. I knew that it would be a time I would look back on one day with fondness and love. I knew I would remember him smiling across the table from me as we ate our lunch, and the ear-to-ear grin on his face as he enjoyed the milkshake he would get for dessert. Although I was now grown up and in some ways our roles had reversed, he was still my dad, the man who drove me to school and talked to me about the news and what was going on in the world, an encyclopedia of knowledge who always had an answer to my questions and usually was right. As I move forward in life, I will miss him and wish he was still here to answer my questions. He was my advisor, the editor of my writing, but most importantly, he was my dad. I am so grateful to have had the time with him that I did. I will think of him often as I continue on my journey through life, and I will love him forever. Thank you.